Everybody, this is Dustin with www.gamblingonfreedom.com. I'm a certified hypnotherapist specializing in problem gambling, gambling addiction, compulsive gambling. And in today's video, I want to talk to you about a common fear that not everybody talks about in this space. A fear that gamblers or people addicted to gambling might come across when they're just about to be ready for change, right? And so when people think about quitting gambling, they usually assume the fear is, something obvious, that the fear of failing again or the fear of trying something new and ending up being disappointed, the fear of putting hope into something and having it fall apart is the real fear. And for some people, that fear is real. But there's another side of this that doesn't really get talked about nearly as much, even though it quietly influences a lot of behavior to coming into change work, right? So sometimes the fear isn't about not quitting. Sometimes the fear is about actually quitting. Because if quitting doesn't work, nothing really has to change. Life continues the way it already is. The nervous system keeps doing what it already knows how to do. And even if things aren't great, they're familiar and predictable. If you've watched this channel before, as a hypnotherapist, I talk about the knowns and how to the subconscious mind, we really only have knowns and unknowns. And if it's an unknown, it's a potential threat to survival, a potential threat to safety. And what's known to you, whether it's good or bad, is still known to you. It's familiar, it's safe, right? So that's why you can get locked into repeating patterns that don't feel good, bad habits, toxic relationships, coping strategies such as gambling or smoking or drinking or whatever. Even if you don't want to do that anymore, it's sort of locked in because to the subconscious, it's the familiar, it's the safe, it's the known, right? So if quitting works, then something very different has to happen from the nervous system's point of view. It's already safe, right? It's already safe enough. And so on the surface, it might sound strange to say that people are less afraid of things not working. But when you look at it through sort of the lens of the nervous system, it can start to make a lot more sense, right? If quitting gambling doesn't work, then there's no new territory to navigate, no unfamiliar emotional landscape, no identity shift required. The system gets to remain organized around the same patterns, the same routines, the same internal rhythm it has learned to survive within, right? And so, even if that rhythm includes stress or regret or pain, it's still known, right? And known discomfort is often easier for the nervous system to tolerate than unknown stability, if you want to call it that. So, paradoxically, failure doesn't actually threaten the system very much, but success can. Success does. That's why some people have a fear of success, some people have a fear of failure. Right? And so, when quitting gambling is just an idea, right, to the nervous system, it can stay relatively calm. Ideas don't require adaptation, they don't require movement. Possibilities don't require organization or reorganization, I should say. But when quitting can start to feel real, when the idea shifts from maybe someday I'll quit to this could actually happen now, right? Something more deep can begin to move a little bit. The system stops asking, can I do this? And starts asking, what happens if I do? That question doesn't come from doubt, it comes from orientation. So, because now that structure that has been quietly organizing sort of life in this way with the gambling is at risk, it starts to get scared. The nervous system starts to, you know, act differently. And so for many people, gambling hasn't just been an activity, it's been an internal organizing force, right? It's how they shape time being spent, emotions being regulated, uh, stress being released, how boredom is escaped, right? Even the cycle itself, the sort of tension, anticipation, relief, regret, right, becomes familiar to the nervous system. That loop is quite literally what keeps it stuck. You have this tension. I've talked on my channel a lot about this tension. It can be from anxiety or stress or just mundaneness or boredom, some kind of tension. It could be a trigger that triggers some tension. And it's a lot like, walking all day with a pair of shoes that are two sizes too small, right? Two sizes too small. At the end of the day, you take off the shoes and you have this relief. But the truth is that you should have never had the tension in the first place, which therefore the relief isn't necessary, right? And so that tension is there. And then there's this anticipation, the thoughts and urges and cravings to go gamble, right? This anticipation, this dopamine spike of anticipation of getting out there and relieving that tension, right? And then you go do it, right? And then you have the relief, right? You moved from pain, you went towards pleasure, you capitalized on the urges. And then after that relief, after you leave the casino, whether you win or lose, if you're a gambling addict and you're trying to get out of the addiction, after that relief, you're going to have regret, you're going to have shame. And then that starts to build the tension back. And then anticipation, relief, regret. And it's just that loop. Right? So it becomes very familiar to the nervous system, and that's almost the addiction part. And it's why we get stuck. And so familiarity matters more to the nervous system than the outcomes do, right? So it's not about the money, it's about familiarity. Okay. And if you've been stuck in that loop for a long time, all your nervous system really cares about is the known, which is that loop, right? So when gambling begins to sort of loosen its grip, the system notices it immediately, not because it wants to keep gambling, but because something that has been providing structure, known, familiar structure, is starting to fade, right? And so it notices it. And continuing to gamble doesn't require learning anything new about yourself, right? It doesn't require forming a new relationship with boredom or stress or emotion, but quitting does. Continuing keeps the internal map intact. Quitting redraws the map. And even when the old map leads somewhere painful, it's still a map the system knows how to follow. And that's why stopping can feel more destabilizing than continuing. Even when the desire to quit is a very genuine desire, even if you really, really, really want to quit, it's still more destabilizing than staying in the internal loop. So the thought of, what if this works, usually isn't about excitement. It's about uncertainty, right? Who am I without this pattern guiding my attention? What do I do when the urge isn't there to respond to? What fills the time, the space, the quiet moments? How do I handle stress when the old outlet is gone? These questions aren't conscious most of the time. They show up as hesitation, as delay, as a vague sense of, I don't know yet, right? But they're not signs of resistance. They're signs that the nervous system is trying to imagine a future that it hasn't experienced yet or hasn't experienced in a long time, perhaps. And so most people imagine that if quitting gambling works, it will feel dramatic or anxiety provoking, perhaps like a sudden rush of motivation or purpose. Even there might be a little of excitement, anxiety, and excitement, kind of the same energy, right? So there might be a liberating, exciting feeling. There might be a dramatic, anxious feeling in a way, and it's rare that the energizing, liberating, um, exciting feeling shows up first. What usually comes first is relief, right? There's like a sense of like, yes, I'm gonna quit and everything's gonna be fine. And so there's a noticeable reduction in pull, a softening of urgency, right? Less internal noise demanding intention. And for many people, that relief doesn't feel exciting. It does feel quiet. It feels kind of calm, neutral, undramatic. And if your nervous system has been living in intensity for a long time, cycling between stress and release, that quietness can feel unfamiliar. It's not bad, it's not empty, it's just different. The system isn't used to operating without pressure, without something constantly sort of tugging at it. So it pauses, it listens, it waits. And that pause is often mistaken for something being wrong, right? So, there's this tension, there's always this anxiety or this boredom or this fear or this stress or something. And when you think of not gambling anymore, there's a sort of quietness, maybe a sense of relief, a sense of excitement around it. But that relief, that excitement, that better feeling, it can feel like it's wrong to the nervous system because the nervous system is so used to that pool of pain, if you will. And so it's a nervous system sort of realizing it doesn't need to be on high alert anymore. And it kind of feels weird, right? It can kind of feel out of whack, right? And so, a common fear people carry, often without realizing it, is that if gambling fades, life will feel empty. But what's actually happening is the absence of survival pressure, right? So the system is no longer being pushed and pulled by urgency. It's no longer forced to chase relief or intensity. And that absence can feel that strange, can feel strange. It feels like it feels different than the tension that has been the normal sort of baseline for however long the addiction has been there, right? So that lack of that tension feels strange. It feels unfamiliar, and unfamiliar is unknown, and so it can feel different, right? And so one thing to know here is neutrality is not emptiness. Neutral is stabilization. Stabilization is what allows desire, curiosity, and meaning to emerge naturally, not under force. So if you're you know if you have all this tension, all this boredom, all this fear, all this anxiety, and you're trying to change your life while in that state, it's almost impossible to do so. Any gambling addict who's tried to quit and has not been able to knows this, right? It's not as easy as just saying, "Oh, I'm going to change my life. I'm going to change the meaning. I'm going to change my purpose. I'm going to change my goals. I'm going to change everything." And then they go right back into it because they're making the choice from a state of chaos instead of a state of neutral, right? And you need to be neutral. You need to have those emotions processed. You need to have those feelings and those sensations processed to come back into a neutral state so that you can create a choice that actually drives desire, curiosity, meaning, identity, belief. Right? You can't do that from a dysregulated state. So, purpose doesn't show up while the nervous system is still in survival mode. Um, when the body is focused on regulation and relief, there's no room for long-term direction, right? So when gambling stops, there's often a period when things feel quieter before they feel meaningful. That pause isn't a failure, it's a recalibration, right? The nervous system is learning what it's like to exist without driving uh, urgency with every decision, right? And that learning actually takes time, right? So some people, they have their emotions processed, they come into neutral, and they're almost looking for the tension and the anxiety, and it's sitting with that neutral feeling that can take a little bit of time to understand that this is actually a good thing. Being here is what allows you to have real progress with later going forward with the without the addiction, I should say. When gambling loses its grip, right, people don't lose themselves. All right, I want you to be clear about that. What actually disappears is that constant pull, the internal bargaining, the feeling of being driven. What remains is choice, the ability to decide instead of react, to pause instead of chase, and to respond instead of being compelled to do something, right? And that shift can feel understated, especially if chaos has been familiar, right? But if it's the familiar, just because it's the familiar, even if it's bad, it's going to stay longer because it's familiar. So that shift can feel understated, but it is profound. And it is a profound shift of feelings, emotions, sensations, urgency, drive. Sometimes people do drift back toward old patterns, right? Briefly, not because they want them, but because familiarity, again, is still feeling grounding. The nervous system knows that territory, it understands it. right? It doesn't mean quitting didn't work. It means the system is still learning that safety exists without the old structure. And safety isn't learned through logic, all right? It's learned through experience, it's learned through the body, is where it's actually learned. And so the real trade off isn't between gambling and not gambling, it's between familiar discomfort and unfamiliar stability, between being driven and being free to choose. Right? And for the nervous system, that's a very significant shift. Even when the conscious mind, even the logical mind wants it, being free to choose it without trying to force it through willpower or through desire or any of these things, it's a different thing. It's a different shift. It feels different. It feels more regulated. It feels calmer. It feels steadier. It's maybe a good way to put it. And so you don't need to know who you'll be without gambling. You don't need to know what will replace it. You don't need a plan for every quiet moment. All that's required is enough safety in your body for the next layer of you to emerge naturally. Identity isn't created in advance, it's discovered once the pressure lifts. Once you start to feel that sense of neutrality, once you start to feel that sense of safety, that sense of calm within your nervous system, that's when you can start to discover who you really are without gambling. So, if the thought of sort of what if this does work, what if I book a session and we do the program and we work on my gambling and the gambling ends, if the what if it works sort of thoughts have ever crossed your mind, like even a quiet, I don't know if this is going to work, but what if it did? And I don't even know what's going to happen if it does work, and you're kind of in that state. I just want to let you know, it doesn't mean you're, afraid of change. It just often means that change is so close, it's enough to feel real, right? And sometimes the most important shift isn't deciding what comes next. It's realizing you might finally have the space to find out, right? So anyway, that was it for this video. I wanted to kind of introduce this sort of fear that I hear some people talk about, which it's very rare. Most people think that it's scarier to stay where they are. But the truth is that it's actually a lot scarier to have it actually work sometimes. And that could be creating some hesitation to coming in and actually working this out for yourself. So if you would like any help with this, sign up for a free consultation below, a free strategy call, if you will. It's just us chatting, talking about what might be going on, and just to see if we're a good fit. My aim is to help you quit gambling if that's what you want to do. I'll leave that link in the description below. And if you do want to do something in between now and then, there is a nervous system reset guide that I have also linked down in the channel, and you can pick that up as well. So if this landed for any of you guys, feel free to share and comment and like the video. We're growing the channel slowly but surely and helping a lot of people along the way. So any support is great and always appreciated. All right, that's it for now, guys. You have a good one.